Welcome to Research Analytics Hub, where research gets real. Today, we're exploring a key challenge in higher education: why college students continue to struggle with English listening skills despite curriculum reforms. This episode is based on the insightful research paper on English listening learning strategies for college students by Xiaomei Zhang. We'll break down the core findings and share practical, research-backed strategies to help students improve their listening comprehension and oral communication. Let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. You're trying to learn a new language, and, well, you're probably spending time on grammar, maybe practicing speaking.
Definitely expanding vocabulary.
Right, vocabulary too. But how much focus are you really putting on that tricky part, really getting what you hear?
Mm-hmm. The speed, the nuances.
The whole flow of natural conversation,
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's a huge challenge. I mean, listening is absolutely fundamental for communication, right?
Absolutely.
But unlike reading where you set the pace or writing where you control everything, listening is, well, it's real-time processing.
And it's messy.
Exactly. All the messiness included.
In this deep dive, we're specifically looking at English listening strategies for college students.
Yeah, based on one particular article that really zeroes in on why it's still such a hurdle for so many, even with more training these days.
The source highlights that, in the context they're discussing, English is seen as this crucial basic skill.
Right. And college reforms have definitely upped the ante on English requirements.
And listening is key there, especially with more focus on actually speaking the language.
But the environment often doesn't make it easy to actually master those listening skills.
And this is where the article gets really interesting, maybe a bit concerning, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It points out that even with more listening training built into college programs.
Which you'd think would help.
Right. But the actual outcome for students is still described as, and this is the word they use, unsatisfactory.
Oof. Unsatisfactory. That really, that cuts to the core problem this article is looking at.
Exactly. If they're getting more training, why isn't it, sticking?
What's going wrong? What are the underlying issues stopping that training from actually leading to better listening?
So our mission for this deep dive is to dig into this article's analysis. What does it see as the main roadblocks?
And more importantly, what specific strategies does it suggest to, well, get beyond unsatisfactory?
Yeah, what can we learn from this? Whether you're a college student facing this or honestly just anyone trying to level up their listening skills in any language.
Okay, so let's start with the diagnosis. Why is college English listening so difficult, according to this article?
Well, it breaks it down into a few key areas. And the first one kind of points back at history.
The legacy of traditional teaching methods.
That's it. It argues that the foundational learning, especially middle and high school, it was heavily weighted towards reading and writing.
Right. The priority was often about skills for tests, standardized tests.
Not really about building a well-rounded language ability.
And you definitely see the impact when students get to college. They might be great writers, maybe good readers.
But then they hit exams I think they mentioned CT4 and CET6.
Exactly. Where suddenly the listening part counts for a lot more.
And listening needs, intense focus, right? And processing a lot of input fast.
Skills that just weren't the focus of that earlier test prep style training.
So they show up ready for one thing, but pretty underprepared for the listening demands in college.
Yeah, it's a mismatch. So beyond the history, the article also looks closely at the students themselves.
Their characteristics, their habits.
Yeah, it notes that students come into college with a really varied baseline of English,
Yeah.
Depending on the resources they had before.
Makes sense. And sometimes they stick to maybe inefficient ways of learning.
The source mentions this thing about relying too much on catching key words.
Okay. Trying to grab onto specific words.
Right. Focusing super hard on those, maybe writing them down. But in doing that, they lose the overall thread.
They miss the main point of longer chunks of speech.
Exactly. Key information just flies by.
And vocabulary, that's mentioned too, right?
Oh, yeah. Insufficient vocabulary is flagged as just a direct major barrier.
Yeah.
Pretty simple, really.
If you don't know the words.
You just can't process the message. Simple as that.
There's also a really interesting point in there about dialect.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
It suggests that students who speak English, but with a strong dialect influence, might sometimes develop, pronunciation that isn't quite standard.
Okay.
And the article implies this isn't just about being understood. It can kind of create an internal disconnect weakening their basic sense of how English should sound.
So their own speaking patterns might actually interfere with learning to listen effectively.
That's what it seems to suggest. It creates a conflict with picking up good listening strategies.
Wow, that connection between your own speech and your listening is fascinating. Your internal language model affecting how you decode sound.
Yeah. And then the third big hurdle the article points to is, well, the listening materials themselves at college level.
Right, they change quite a bit from high school.
The scope just explodes. Materials cover everything from, daily life chats
to really abstract academic stuff, professional communication scenarios.
Yeah, a huge range. And they even mention technical glitches sometimes.
Oh, like electronic interference messing up the audio.
Yeah, preventing sentences from being fully heard. Just another layer of difficulty.
But the big shift is definitely the content becoming more abstract, more academic or professional.
It's way harder than, say, listening to a simple chat about ordering coffee.
Absolutely. You need specialized vocabulary. You need to follow more complex sentences, all delivered quickly.
And the article links this back to the student's own speaking and writing.
How so?
It suggests students often avoid using difficult sentences or complex words themselves.
They stick to simpler language when they produce it.
Right, which might make things easier in the moment.
But it means they don't develop the ability to understand that complexity when they hear it from someone else.
Exactly. It's like it creates a ceiling on their listening comprehension because they're not wrestling with richer language in their own practice.
It's a cycle. Avoiding difficulty here holds you back there.
So, yeah, the article really paints this picture of interconnected challenges. Old teaching methods, student habits, and variations, the tougher material.
That's the why it's hard part, laid out pretty clearly.
So how does the article suggest tackling these issues? What are the strategies it puts forward?
Okay, it proposes several ways forward. The first big one is about smart material selection.
Choosing the right stuff to listen to. That seems fundamental.
Definitely. The source really emphasizes matching materials to where the students are actually at their characteristics, their current ability.
And making it progressive.
Exactly. A step-by-step approach. You start simpler, maybe words and phrases tied to things they know, like life experiences.
So they can grasp the main ideas in relatable situations first.
Right. Build confidence. Then gradually move to harder stuff, paragraphs, full texts.
It also mentions using different kinds of sources, not just textbooks.
Yeah, things like audio from films or TV shows, English songs, even question bank materials, which can mimic exam formats but are great for practice.
There's a really interesting bit in the article about using these materials for, deeper analysis.
Deeper how?
They talk about analyzing things like humanistic literacy or ideological connotation, sentence by sentence.
Okay, that sounds potentially quite academic.
Well, the way I read it, it's less about getting lost in theory and more about engaging so closely with the language, its cultural hints, its implied meanings.
That you start to internalize the sounds and rhythms almost subconsciously.
That's the idea. It's like this deep dive into meaning helps you unconsciously master the pronunciation and flow.
Analyzing meaning to help internalize sound. That's a cool connection. It reframes listening from just hearing noise to really processing language.
Okay, strategy number 2 the article brings up, flexible timing and duration.
Tackling the busy student schedule.
Yeah, it acknowledges students are packed and often only listen when, a teacher assigns it.
So the suggestion is?
Guide students towards learning independently using fragmented time.
Those little pockets of time. Commuting, walking between classes.
Exactly. Waiting in line, short breaks. The idea is that consistent short bursts of listening can really add up.
And leverage things like campus radio or maybe online platforms the school provides.
Yeah, create opportunities for almost unconscious contact with English during the day.
So it feels less like boring training, more like just being exposed to it.
Right. And the article argues this isn't just convenient. It actually helps improve their spontaneous speaking.
Builds that language sense over time.
And makes it easier to recall things they've heard when they encounter similar language later on.
Okay, makes sense. Then there's a third strategy focusing on varied training skills.
Right, it's not just one type of practice.
No, the source lists a mix, like pure listening practice, but also listening and speaking dialogue.
Dictation.
Dictation to really hone in on sounds and structure, yeah. And standard listening comprehension exercises, too.
The goal seems to be creating a kind of real English language environment.
Not necessarily physically, but by using interesting everyday materials, so practice feels possible anytime, anywhere.
And crucially, linking listening with other skills.
How so?
Well, summarizing materials is suggested. That helps with grammar practice alongside the listening.
Okay.
And using functional English materials, which sounds like real-world stuff, articles, news, instructions.
Authentic materials.
Yeah. To expand vocabulary naturally, see words in context, practice figuring out logical connection.
And emphasizes speaking, too.
Big time. Seriously correcting grammar mistakes when speaking. Encouraging discussion.
Using textbook dialogues, maybe, to standardize pronunciation and rhythm.
Exactly. Reinforcing that improving your overall communication ability directly helps your listening. It's all connected.
Which brings us to the fourth strategy, adapting teaching methods.
Yeah, call for teachers to change things up. Create systematic listening training methods that are actually tailored to students.
So in the classroom, what does that look like?
Maybe using English more for instruction, perhaps with some humor.
Yeah.
Creating situations where students are actively perceiving language in practice.
Not just passive listening.
Right. And using technology is a big one.
Like the internet.
Yeah, using online content to maybe spark students' own desire to express themselves. Using it to show culture, history of English-speaking places, and have students talk about it.
Role-playing simulated dialogues.
Those two, yeah. To help students actively spot their own weak points.
And ideally, real-world interaction.
That seems like the gold standard here. Creating practical activities or using the school's international connections for actual conversations with proficient speakers.
That exposure to authentic natural speech must be invaluable. Helps you understand the real flow, recognize those fuzzy words.
The ones that aren't perfectly clear, but you get from context. Yeah.
So, pulling all these different threads together, what's the article's main takeaway?
It concludes that the best path involves teachers guiding students towards effective independent practice, always working on vocabulary.
And ensuring that all-round development, listening isn't in a silo.
Exactly. It has to be built alongside speaking, reading, and writing.
And it leaves us with that pretty stark warning.
Avoid isolated learning and mechanical training.
Yeah, that seems like the absolute opposite of everything else suggested. No more disconnected drills.
Right. The practice needs context. It needs purpose. It needs to be woven into the student's whole language journey.
We've covered a lot of ground here based on this one article's perspective.
Yeah, we looked at why college English listening can be so tough, that legacy of old teaching styles, the student habits and knowledge gaps, the tricky nature of the materials.
And then we explored the strategies it proposes. Smart material selection with gradual steps, fitting practice into fragmented time, using varied skills linked together.
And how teachers can adapt using tech and real-world interaction.
And while this article, focuses specifically on college students in a certain setting,
doesn't this just resonate with anyone learning any language?
I think so. That core idea that listening isn't just about hearing sounds.
It's tied so deeply to your vocabulary, your grammar, your cultural understanding, even how accurately you speak yourself.
It really does highlight that language learning isn't just checking off boxes for skills. It's this complex, interconnected thing.
An ecosystem, yeah.
And that final warning from the article about avoiding isolated learning, that feels really powerful.
So maybe the question for you, the listener, is what does that really mean for your learning?
Whatever language you're working on.
Yeah. How can you actively integrate listening practice so it's not just mechanical, but truly meaningful?
Connecting it with speaking, reading, writing.
And maybe most importantly, weaving it into your actual life, the topics and interests that genuinely grab you.
That seems like a really worthwhile question to think about as you continue your own deep dive into mastering a language.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Research Analytics Hub, where research gets real. We hope you found the discussion on English listening learning strategies for college students by Xiaomei Zhang both insightful and practical. Stay tuned for more episodes where we break down meaningful research and explore real-world applications. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and keep making research real.